Episode 2. The Cost of the Korean War and the Hidden Historical Consequences opening. Welcome back to our journey through history. In the first episode, we traced the origins of the Korean War and uncovered the truth behind the CCP's Resist America, Aid Korea narrative. Today, we continue this exploration, focusing on the immense costs China paid in the war, the historical fact of being designated an aggressor by the United Nations, and how the conflict altered China's international standing and the prospects for the Taiwan issue. Let us continue to lift the veil and seek the hidden truths of history. 1. The cost of the war. Casualties and isolation. The Korean War was a profoundly costly conflict for China. According to official Chinese data, approximately 197,000 Chinese soldiers died, and over 380,000 were wounded. U.S. estimates suggest even higher Chinese casualties. In contrast, American losses were significantly lower, with about 36,000 deaths and 103,000 injuries. This stark disparity in casualties reflects China's disadvantages in equipment, training, and strategy. The more severe consequence was international isolation. On February 1, 1951, the United Nations General Assembly, with 44 votes in favor, 7 against, and 9 abstentions, passed a resolution declaring that the Central People's Government of the People's Republic of China is engaged in aggression in Korea. This marked the first time the UN explicitly labeled China as an aggressor, and China was the only nation so designated in the Korean War. On May 18, 1951, the UN passed an embargo resolution against China and North Korea, prohibiting the export of arms, ammunition, petroleum, atomic energy materials, and other strategic resources. This sanction excluded China from the Western world, forcing it to rely heavily on the Soviet Union. For the next 2 decades, China missed out on the golden era of global economic, technological, and cultural development following World War II, plunging its people into hardship. It was not until the reforms and opening up of the 1970s that conditions began to improve. 2. Hidden Truths. The CCP's historical narrative. The 2021 edition of A Brief History of the Chinese Communist Party continues to describe the Korean War as resisting America, aiding Korea, and defending the homeland, proclaiming its victory as a milestone in the great rejuvenation of the Chinese nation. However, this narrative omits critical facts. It does not mention China's designation as an aggressor by the UN or the resulting consequences. It obscures the war's origins, avoiding responsibility for Kim Il-sung's proactive invasion. It ignores the war's disruption of plans to reunify Taiwan. This selective storytelling persists in CCP propaganda. In 2021, China released films such as The Battle at Lake Changjin and Sniper, themed around resisting America, aiding Korea, to stoke nationalist sentiment while showing little intent to restore historical truth. For instance, on October 23, 2020, Xi Jinping, in a speech commemorating the 70th anniversary of Chinese troops entering the Korean War, reiterated the defend the homeland narrative, claiming the war's victory enabled China to stand tall in the East. Yet he made no mention of the economic, technological, and diplomatic costs China incurred, nor did he address how the war reshaped Asia's geopolitical landscape. 3. The turning point for Taiwan. One of China's greatest strategic losses in the Korean War was the missed opportunity to reunify Taiwan by force. Before the war, the U.S. Truman administration's stance on Taiwan was ambiguous. On January 5, 1950, Truman issued a statement declaring that the U.S. had no intention of interfering in Taiwan's affairs or providing military aid to Taiwan. Secretary of State Dean Acheson's speech on the Pacific Defense Line also excluded Taiwan from America's defense perimeter. However, the outbreak of the Korean War changed everything. On June 27, 1950, Truman announced the deployment of the 7th Fleet to the Taiwan Strait, citing the neutralization of the Taiwan Strait. Contrary to the CCP's claim of an invasion of Taiwan, this decision aimed to prevent escalation between the two sides. Truman explicitly demanded that Taiwan cease military actions against the mainland while also blocking a Chinese communist attack on Taiwan. The war also prompted the U.S. to reassess Taiwan's strategic value. Historians note that without the Korean War, China and the U.S. might have eased tensions or even established diplomatic ties in the early 1950s. However, China's entry into the war intensified U.S.-China confrontation, leading the U.S. to view Taiwan as a bulwark against communism. From Taiwan's perspective, the Korean War was a pivotal moment that spared it from CCP control. After the war, the U.S. forged alliances with Taiwan, South Korea, Japan, and others, forming a maritime containment line against China that continues to shape China's strategic environment in the Asia-Pacific region. 4. The reshaping of Asia's geopolitical landscape. The Korean War not only altered China's fate but also reshaped Asia's geopolitical framework. Before the war, the U.S. had no military presence on the East Asian mainland. After the war, U.S. troops became permanently stationed in South Korea, and the U.S. formed alliances with Japan, the Philippines, Australia, and others, creating an encirclement around China. Historian William Stuke argues that China's only victory in the war may have been securing a buffer zone in the form of the Democratic People's Republic of Korea along its northeastern border. However, this came at a tremendous cost. China not only lost opportunities for engagement with the West but also sparked fears among Asian nations about its military might, prompting the long-term U.S. military presence in the region. For the U.S., the Korean War was a limited war, aimed at containing communist expansion rather than conquering China. America's true strategic focus was Europe, and its participation in the Korean War was to prove its leadership to allies. By the war's end, U.S. global influence grew stronger, while China was left isolated. 5. The far-reaching impact of the war. The Korean War's impact on China extended far beyond the battlefield. It solidified the Sino-Soviet alliance but also made China overly dependent on the Soviet Union economically and technologically. Post-war, the Soviet Union provided support for China's industrial development, but this assistance came at a price. China's autonomy in international affairs was constrained. The war also altered the trajectory of U.S.-China relations. Without the Korean War, the two nations might have reached some form of reconciliation in the 1950s. Instead, their confrontation persisted until the 1970s, when Nixon's visit to China broke the deadlock. For ordinary Chinese people, the war's toll was heavy. Hundreds of thousands of families lost loved ones, and the nation's economy suffered under sanctions. The CCP's historical narrative glorifies the war as a great victory, but rarely reflects on its long-term impact on the country and its people. Conclusion. The Korean War remains a deeply controversial historical event. It was not only a critical conflict in the early Cold War but also profoundly shaped China's destiny. The CCP's "Resist America, Aid Korea" narrative fosters national pride but conceals the war's true causes and costs. Through these two episodes, we hope to restore the complex facets of history, letting truth emerge from the river of time. Thank you for joining us, and let's continue seeking answers in history.